Well, a hearty shalom to you. Jeffrey Seif here. We're working our way through the book of Acts. The 6th chapter is we're beginning. Thanks for going on the journey with me. In Acts chapter 6, verse 7, there's a statement here that's a leftover from the last talk. The word of God kept spreading. That's always good to see spreading. The number of disciples in Jerusalem was greatly multiplied. I like to see disciples in Jerusalem. Then and now we're seeing more and more of that. Even a great number of the Kohanim, or the priests, were becoming obedient to the faith. I like that. The myth is that all the Jews rejected Jesus and that Jesus rejected all the Jews, and that's just utterly nonsense. Talk like that says more about the jaded perspective of the person who's talking than what it is they're purporting to talk about. In the 6th chapter, we see there were some tensions and disputes. Money was collected by the Talmidim, by the disciples, and then there was some jealousy. Tensions arose as to how the money would be distributed, and the diaconate was called forth to serve as the executives of a benevolence ministry. Today, deacons are the people that keep the preachers in line. I don't really see that in the literature, but I don't want to get into that. Suffice it to say, we do see the calling forth of individuals, and there's this guild that's established to superintend the distributions of funds. That attended to, in verse 8, one of those shamishim, one of those deacons is singled out, Stephen, and that's a Greek name, by the way. We're told that he was full of grace and power, and I just want to read this and work through it because there are things here I want you to grasp. Stephen was full of grace and power and was doing great wonders and signs among the people. I mean, there's some sense that God is with him. He's special like that. In verse 9, but some men from what was called the synagogue of the freedmen. There were different kinds of synagogues back then. Today, people think of Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform or whatever. That reflects divisions that evolved well after all of this. Their synagogues weren't as institutionalized yesterday as today. These are individuals that gather in like home groups, we'd call them. Not all synagogues had buildings. You just need 10 Jews to gather together for a minyan, and there's all kinds of these groups, these fellowships, and some from the synagogue of the freedmen, so-called, both Cyrenians and Alexandrians, both out of North Africa, as well as some from Cilicia and Asia, stood up and began arguing with Stephen, but they could not withstand the wisdom and the ruach, or the spirit by whom he was speaking. So, innovation causes confrontation. The Lord's working here and, stirring it up. And so Stephen is getting into it. He's drawn some criticism. I like to say the only way to avoid criticism is to say nothing, be nothing, and do nothing. But that certainly isn't, this guy has chutzpah. He's bold. We're told in verse 11, then they secretly instigated men into saying, we have heard him speaking blasphemous words against Moses and against God. Now, what's interesting is to present him as being against Moses. The author here says they were stealthy in so doing. I mean, the presumption here is that that they're not teaching against Moses. Now, by the way, the classic perspective is that Moses is dead, and what arose out of the ruins of a Mosaic understanding was the New Testament that is divested and devoid of Mosaic influence, or what they called it in the Middle Ages, in the later Middle Ages, the dead law of Moses. Well, here the notion that he's being offensive to Moses is stuck in there stealthily. I mean, at the end of the book, Paul is on record saying, we've never done anything against Moses or the teaching of the fathers. That we'll develop that a little more. But here they're looking to incite a mob by giving this false information Today, there are people like myself that want to live a little more Mosaic than the church has given permission. And this is because so many Jewish people have come to faith, and we're wanting to bring some of what that means to be Jewish along with us on the journey. And others cry foul. You can't do that anymore. Well, I beg to differ. We're told in verse 12, they also incited the people, the elders, and the Torah scholars, and they rushed at Stephen, seized him, and led him away to the Sanhedrin. They set up false witnesses who said, this man never stopped speaking words against the holy place in the Torah. These are understood to be false witnesses. Now, church history, by the way, has spoken against the place and the Torah from time immemorial. What's interesting here is that false witnesses are put forth. That is, an understanding of what Jesus is all about in the Word that pits him against Jerusalem, the Torah, Moses. That's stealthy. That's false. That's not a good read of what he's really all about. And within the Messianic Jewish world today, we're minded to give voice to that. This is so contrary to the understanding that is passed on through the generations, where individuals take their liberty in casting aspersions on things Jewish. Well, these are false witnesses in verse 13 and 14. They say, we have heard him saying that this Yeshua HaNetzrati, this Jesus of Nazareth, will destroy this place that is the temple and change the customs that Moses handed down to us. These people are saying that forget Moses. But this is understood in the text to be a false testimony, and they're twisting some words of Yeshua, Jesus, on record, saying, destroy this temple and I'll raise it in 3 days. And that is a prediction of his own resurrection. But it's here, the language is being imposed upon to claim that Jesus is all about destroying the temple. And he isn't. Christianity is, in so many ways. That's the Jewish stuff is buried and belongs to yesteryear. It's interesting. In verse 15, watching him intently, everyone who was sitting in the Sanhedrin saw that his face was like the face of an angel. Here's the guys in the throes of all this deceit. This Stephen really is taking a lot of hits. And there's a certain calm that he has amidst the storm. He is in the 7th chapter going to go and tender a rather lengthy defense. That'll be the object of our attention at another point. Here, I wanted to look at how in Jerusalem, according to Luke, Paul's biographer and the fellow who writes the history of the early church, we're told that Jews were just getting involved in the Jesus story, and from the higher echelons at that. To me, that's an interesting story. Similarly, we're told here that it's a twist to the story to present that these followers of Jesus are hell-bent on being disrespectful toward the Mosaic economy. I think that stuff is fascinating. And by the way, I represent individuals in this world that want to be much more Jewish-friendly than has been traditionally granted. And in fact, the translators of the Tree of Life Bible, similarly, like me, we are minded to raise up a Jewish testimony. We're minded to want to articulate the story in a way that comports with Jewish sensibilities, not needlessly confronts Jewish sensibilities. And that said, I want to thank you for going on the journey with us. If it wasn't for friends that care to share, that you care about what we're all about, thus the Tree of Life version of the Bible means something to you. The Bible Society means something to you, and you sow seeds into that. Thank you for helping us tell this Jewish-friendly story. And I'll open up the pages of the book. We'll do it again in a week as we continue in the 7th chapter. Thanks for taking a look at the book with me. God bless. Jeffrey Seif signing out. Let's do this again in a week. Ciao.